Train my stallion, cowboy, and take my maid." The sheriff laughed and pushed the Chinese girl forward. The dust of Redemption Gulch settled on Jedediah's worn boots as the words hung in the oppressive summer air. Sheriff Brody, a man whose authority was as heavy and polished as the star on his chest, smirked at the assembled crowd. The men leaning against the general store porch post stopped whittling and watched, their eyes glinting with cruel amusement. Jedediah, a drifter with nothing to his name but a steady nerve and the calluses on his hands, had made the mistake of admiring the sheriff's horse. It was a creature of midnight and fury, a black stallion named Obsidian that had thrown every man who dared to saddle him. Brody's pride was a fragile, vicious thing, and Jedediah's quiet comment had pricked it. Now this public spectacle was the result. The girl, who couldn't have been more than 18, stumbled but caught her balance with a grace that defied the rough shove. She wore a simple prairie dress of faded pink, the fabric thin against the heat. Her hair was a braid of polished jet, her face a mask of calm composure, though Jedediah saw the slight tremor in her hands. She was a ghost in this town, a silent presence who scrubbed the sheriff's floors and was seen but never acknowledged. Brody's property, like his horse. "He's untamable," Jedediah had said, his voice low. And now the challenge. "You think you've got the touch?" Brody's voice boomed, playing to his audience. "You break that devil, and you can have her. A fine prize for a man with no home." He gestured to the girl again, his ownership of her as clear as if he held a brand. Jedediah looked from the stallion, kicking against the reinforced corral nearby, to the girl. He saw her not as a person, but as a component of the wager, a symbol of victory. Winning her would be like winning the pot in a high-stakes game. It would give him a stake in this town, a reason to stay. He was tired of drifting, of waking up in a new place with the same old emptiness. Maybe this was his chance. The crowd chuckled, a low, rumbling sound of anticipated failure. They saw a dusty vagrant reaching for something far above his station. He looked at the girl one more time. Her eyes met his for a fleeting second, and in their dark depths he saw not fear, but a flicker of something else. Resignation. Patience. It unsettled him, but he pushed the feeling aside. He was a man of action, not introspection. "I'll do it," Jedediah said, his voice cutting through the laughter. The sheriff's smile widened. The trap was sprung. Jedediah's first day with Obsidian was a lesson in humility, delivered with thunderous hooves and bared teeth. The corral was a prison of thick timber, built stronger than the town jail, and for good reason. The stallion was not merely a horse. He was a storm contained, a force of raw, untethered nature. His coat absorbed the blistering sun, shining like polished volcanic rock, and his eyes held a wild intelligence that bordered on malice. As Jedediah slipped through the gate, the heavy bar thudding shut behind him, the world narrowed to this dusty circle of combat. The townspeople watched from a safe distance, their silhouettes dark against the glaring storefronts. He could feel their collective gaze, a physical weight of doubt and scorn. He carried a rope, his hands sure, but his heart hammered against his ribs. He had gentled dozens of horses in his life, from weary geldings to spirited mares, but this was different. This was not about gentling, it was about survival. He moved slowly, speaking in a low, calm voice that was swallowed by the sheer presence of the animal. Obsidian watched him, head high, nostrils flared. Every muscle in his powerful body was coiled, a spring of violent potential. When Jedediah took another step, the stallion exploded. He charged, not with the blind panic of a frightened animal, but with the focused intent of a predator. Jedediah scrambled up the fence just as hooves splintered the wood where he had been standing. The horse wheeled, snorting, and paced the perimeter, its tail a black banner of defiance. For hours this dance continued. Every attempt Jedediah made to approach was met with a fresh wave of aggression. The sun beat down, turning the corral into a furnace. Sweat stung his eyes and soaked his shirt, plastering it to his back. His throat was parched, his muscles aching with a tension that went deeper than simple exertion. This was a battle of will, and he was being brutally outmatched. Late in the afternoon, the girl from the sheriff's office appeared at the fence. He had forgotten about her, about the wager, about everything but the furious beast in front of him. She carried a wooden bucket, the water inside sloshing. Without a word, she set it down just outside the gate and retreated. He watched her go, her pink dress a soft blur against the harsh landscape. He was too proud, too consumed by his struggle to acknowledge the small act of kindness. He saw it only as part of her duty, a task assigned by her cruel master. He turned back to the horse, his resolve hardening into a bitter knot. He would not be beaten. He would conquer this beast, and he would claim his prize. The days bled into one another, each marked by the same grueling pattern of failure and exhaustion. Jedediah's body became a canvas of bruises and scrapes, his spirit worn as thin as the leather on his gloves. He tried every method he knew. He tried the soft word and the patient stance. Obsidian charged him. He tried the firm hand and the quick rope. The stallion nearly trampled him. The horse was a fortress, its walls built of fear and fury, and Jedediah could find no way in. The town's amusement curdled into open mockery. Children would point and shout from the street, and the men at the general store no longer bothered to hide their laughter. Sheriff Brody would often stroll out in the late afternoon, his silver star gleaming, a smug satisfaction on his face. "Having trouble, cowboy?" he would drawl, loud enough for half the town to hear. "Perhaps you're not the horseman you think you are. Don't worry, my Maid is quite safe." The words were designed to humiliate, to remind Jedediah of his place as an outsider, a nobody grasping for a prize he could never earn. Each barb struck home, fueling a desperate anger within him. He began to see the stallion not as an animal to be understood, but as a direct extension of the sheriff's arrogance, a thing to be broken, to be forced into submission. His patience frayed, and then snapped. He grew rougher, his voice harsher, his movements more aggressive. He was no longer trying to gentle the horse. He was trying to win a war. It was a disastrous shift. Obsidian responded to Jedediah's anger with heightened ferocity, his attacks becoming more dangerous, more personal. The contest became a raw and ugly spectacle of man versus beast, and the beast was winning. From the window of the sheriff's office, Leanne watched. She saw the change in Jedediah, the way his shoulders slumped in defeat each evening, the way his frustration was twisting his purpose. She saw him fighting the horse, trying to impose his will upon a creature that had only ever known the cruelty of a master's hand. She saw two spirits, both trapped, both fighting against their cages in a cycle of escalating violence. He was going about it all wrong, and his pride was going to get him killed. One evening, long after the sun had dipped below the jagged horizon, casting the town in shades of purple and orange, Jedediah sat with his back against the corral fence. He was defeated. Every bone in his body ached, and a profound weariness had settled deep in his soul. He had failed. The laughter of the town, the sheriff's taunts, it was all just noise now. All he felt was the deep, hollow shame of being bested. The gate creaked softly. He looked up to see Leanne slipping into the shadows nearby. She moved with a quietness that was almost unnerving, a habit born of a life spent trying to be invisible. In her hands she held a small clay bowl. She didn't approach him directly, but went to the water trough just inside the corral. Jedediah watched, his suspicion warring with his exhaustion. What was she doing? She knelt and placed the bowl on the ground, a safe distance from the still agitated stallion. Then she backed away and stood by the fence, her silhouette slender against the fading light. "What is that?" Jedediah's voice was a rough rasp. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the horse. "Oats," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "With molasses." Obsidian, who had been pacing restlessly, stopped. He scented the air, his ears twitching. He snorted, took a tentative step forward, then another. He lowered his great head and cautiously nudged the bowl. After a moment, he began to eat. Jedediah stared, astonished. He had tried to offer grain, but the horse had refused it, seeing it as just another trick. Leanne remained perfectly still, a silent statue of patience. When the stallion had finished, she retrieved the empty bowl and slipped out of the corral as quietly as she had entered. The next evening, she did the same, and the evening after that. She began leaving other things for him too, a clean cloth and a small tin of salve for his cuts, left on a post where he would find it. She never offered instruction or advice. Her help was a silent current, a gentle offering with no expectation of thanks. It was a language of quiet care, and Jedediah, a man accustomed only to the harsh dialects of survival and dominance, was slowly, reluctantly, beginning to understand it. He started watching her, not as the prize in a wager, but as the person who brought the water and the salve. He noticed the way she moved, with an economy and grace that spoke of a deep, contained strength. She was small, and the world had taught her to take up as little space as possible. Yet there was a powerful dignity in her stillness. He began to look for her, his eyes scanning the windows of the sheriff's office during the long, frustrating days. Her quiet presence at the edge of his struggle became a fixed point in his chaotic world. One evening, as she came with the bowl of oats, he finally broke the silence that had grown between them. "Thank you," he said. The words felt heavy and inadequate in his mouth. She paused, her hand on the gate latch, and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod before disappearing back toward the house. The brief interaction changed something in him. He realized that for days he had been the recipient of her kindness without ever truly acknowledging it. The next day he didn't enter the corral with a rope. He entered with nothing but the oats she had taught him to use. He sat on the ground, a good distance away, and waited. It took hours, but eventually Obsidian's curiosity overcame his fear. He approached, ate the oats from Jedediah's outstretched hand, and allowed Jedediah's fingers to brush against his velvet nose before pulling back. It was a tiny victory, but it felt more significant than landing any rope. That evening he spoke to her again. "He ate from my hand today." A flicker of something, perhaps a smile, touched her lips. "He is not used to kindness," she said softly. "What is your name?" he asked, the question feeling momentous. "Leanne," she replied. Leanne. It was a simple name, but it gave her substance, pulling her out of the category of maid or prize and into the realm of an individual. He started to see the situation through a different lens. He wasn't just fighting a horse. He was trying to earn the trust of a creature that had been deeply wounded. He saw the fear behind the stallion's rage, the memory of pain in his flinching. And in seeing the horse more clearly, he began to see Leanne, another being trapped and mistreated by the same cruel master, responding not with violence, but with a quiet, resilient grace that shamed his own brutish efforts. The nature of the work transformed. The corral was no longer a battleground, but a place of quiet negotiation. Jedediah abandoned the tools of force, the ropes, the loud commands, the aggressive postures. His new tools were patience, stillness, and the sweet-smelling oats Leanne provided each evening. He spent entire days simply existing in the stallion's space, letting Obsidian grow accustomed to his presence. He learned the horse's language, the flick of an ear that meant anxiety, the soft nicker that signaled curiosity, the rigid set of his jaw that spoke of a remembered trauma. A fragile truce gave way to a delicate trust. In parallel, a similar bond was forming outside the fence. His conversations with Leanne grew from brief exchanges to longer talks in the twilight hours. She would linger by the fence after leaving the oats, and he would tell her about the day's small progress. She, in turn, began to share pieces of her own story and her deep understanding of the horse. "Sheriff Brody bought him from a trader," she told him one night, her voice low and sad. "The man was cruel. He used chains and a whip." Obsidian remembers. Her words were a key, unlocking the final puzzle of the stallion's behavior. It wasn't malice driving the horse. It was memory. "He is not mean," she said, her eyes fixed on the magnificent animal now standing calmly by the trough. "He is afraid of the pain he expects. You must show him that your hands are different." Jedediah looked down at his own calloused, rope-burned hands. He had always seen them as tools for work, for gripping, for holding on. He had never considered that they could be instruments of peace. He started to see Leanne not just as a kind helper, but as a source of profound wisdom. Her gentle spirit held more strength than all his brute force combined. The initial motivation for the wager, to win a stake, to earn the town's respect, had faded into the background. Now his purpose was simpler and purer. He wanted to heal the horse. He wanted to earn the quiet approval he saw growing in Leanne's gaze. It was a respect that felt more valuable than the applause of 100 towns. He was no longer trying to break a beast. He was trying to be worthy of its trust. The breakthrough came on a sweltering afternoon, 2 weeks into the ordeal. The air was thick and still, the only sound the buzz of flies and the soft stamp of Obsidian's hooves in the dust. Jedediah had spent the morning just brushing the stallion, running a soft curry comb over his powerful neck and back, murmuring to him. The horse, which once would have answered such a touch with a violent kick, now stood placidly, occasionally leaning into the pressure with a soft sigh. Today was the day he would try the saddle blanket. He picked it up from the fence post, the heavy wool smelling of dust and sun. He let Obsidian sniff it, explore it with his nose. He moved slowly, deliberately, broadcasting every intention. There was no trickery, no sudden movement. He was following Leanne's wisdom, showing the horse that his hands were different. He gently laid the blanket across the stallion's broad back. Obsidian tensed, his muscles bunching, his head shooting up in alarm. Jedediah froze, his hand resting lightly on the blanket, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "Easy now, boy. It's just a blanket. No harm in it." He didn't try to force it, didn't add the saddle. He just stood there, a calming presence, letting the horse process the new sensation. After a long, tense minute, the stallion relaxed. He let out a gusty sigh and lowered his head, nudging Jedediah's shoulder. It was an admission, an acceptance, a quiet, profound victory. Jedediah felt a surge of emotion so powerful it almost buckled his knees. He stroked the horse's neck, his heart full. He looked over to the sheriff's office and saw Leanne standing by the fence, watching. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes shone with a deep, radiant pride that was meant only for him. In that shared glance, an unspoken truth passed between them. The wager was a hollow thing. The true prize was not ownership, but this earned trust, this mutual respect, this quiet connection. At that moment, the sheriff's daughter, Isabel, stepped onto the porch of the main house, a vision in lace and ribbons. She fanned herself lazily, her gaze sweeping over the corral with bored disinterest. Jedediah had once thought that impressing a woman like her was the key to belonging. Now her conventional beauty seemed pale and meaningless compared to the resilient strength he saw in Leanne. The superficial prize had lost all its power. The final day dawned clear and hot. Word had spread through the town that the drifter was going to make his ride. A crowd gathered, larger and more sober than the one that had mocked him weeks ago. They lined the street, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Sheriff Brody stood front and center, his arms crossed over his chest, a confident smirk playing on his lips. He was certain this was the day his horse would finally cripple the upstart cowboy, ending the spectacle once and for all. Jedediah felt a calm he hadn't known was possible. His purpose was clear, and it had little to do with the crowd or the sheriff. He walked into the corral, and Obsidian greeted him with a low nicker. He moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of his newfound partnership with the horse. He brushed him down, his movements fluid and sure. He placed the blanket on his back, followed by the saddle, cinching the girth slowly. The stallion stood like a rock, trusting him completely. The crowd murmured, a wave of astonishment rippling through them. Jedediah swung himself into the saddle. For a moment, man and horse stood perfectly still, a single, powerful silhouette against the morning sun. Then, with a gentle touch of his heels, Jedediah urged Obsidian forward. They walked the perimeter of the corral, then broke into a smooth trot, and finally, a graceful canter. The horse was magnificent, his movements fluid and responsive, a willing partner in the ride. The townsfolk were stunned into a complete, reverent silence. Jedediah had done the impossible. He had tamed the devil. After a few circuits, he brought Obsidian to a halt in the center of the corral and dismounted. A smattering of applause broke out, growing into a wave of grudging respect. He had won. He led the horse to the gate and faced Sheriff Brody. The smirk was gone from the sheriff's face, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. His hubris had been publicly shattered. Brody let the applause die down. Then his face twisted into a cruel, triumphant smile. "Well done, cowboy," he drawled, his voice dripping with venom. "You trained the horse, just as you said. But the deal was you could take the maid." He turned and grabbed Leanne's arm, yanking her forward from the shadows of the porch. "I never said she'd go willingly, and as her legal guardian, I forbid it. You can't take what isn't yours to have." The betrayal was absolute, a masterful piece of public humiliation. Jedediah had fulfilled his part of the bargain, only to be robbed at the finish line by a cruel technicality. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few men chuckled at the sheriff's clever cruelty, but most looked away, a flicker of shame in their eyes. They had witnessed an incredible feat of horsemanship, only to see it culminate in this petty, vicious display of power. Brody tightened his grip on Leanne's arm, his knuckles white. He was a man reasserting his dominance, reminding everyone in Redemption Gulch who held the real authority. Jedediah looked at Brody's sneering face, at the badge that gave him license for such malice, and felt nothing but contempt. All the anger and frustration he had felt during his struggle with Obsidian was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. He then looked at Leanne. Her face was pale, her body rigid in the sheriff's grasp, but she did not cower. She met Jedediah's gaze, and in her eyes he saw not a plea for rescue, but a quiet, unwavering strength. It was the same strength she had shown from the very first day, a resilience the sheriff could never break. In that instant, the entire wager, the town's respect, the victory over Brody, the status he had craved, it all dissolved into meaninglessness. It was a fool's game, and he had been a fool to play it. The true prize was not something to be won or taken. It was a choice to be made. With a resolve that settled deep in his bones, Jedediah moved. He walked past the snorting stallion, past the smug sheriff, and stopped directly in front of Leanne. He ignored Brody completely, as if the man were nothing more than a piece of furniture. His focus was entirely on her. "I will not take you," Jedediah said, his voice quiet but carrying with absolute clarity across the silent yard. The crowd leaned in to listen. "A person is not a prize to be won in a bet." He looked directly into her eyes, offering her the respect no one else in this town ever had. "But I would be honored if you would walk with me, as a free woman." He held out his calloused, empty hand. It was an offer not of ownership, but of partnership. Then he briefly turned his head toward the sheriff, his voice hardening slightly. "The horse is trained, Sheriff, but his spirit belongs to him, not you, just like hers." Sheriff Brody's face turned a mottled shade of red. He was sputtering, his authority utterly undermined by a drifter's simple moral declaration. He had expected a fight, an argument, a plea. He had not expected to be rendered irrelevant. The crowd watched, mesmerized, as the drama played out not with fists, but with a quiet choice. Leanne looked from Brody's furious face to Jedediah's outstretched hand. That hand was not the hand of a master, but of an equal. It was scarred and worn from the work he had done, work that she had guided him through, work that had transformed him. In his eyes, she saw a future she had never dared to imagine for herself, one of dignity and freedom. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, the whole town held its breath. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace that was all her own, she pulled her arm free from the sheriff's slackening grip. She took a step forward and placed her small hand into Jedediah's. His fingers closed around hers, a warm and steady promise. Together, without a backward glance, they turned and began to walk. They walked away from the corral, away from the magnificent horse, away from the sputtering, defeated sheriff. The crowd parted for them, a silent sea of faces filled with a new, profound respect that had nothing to do with a tamed horse. They walked down the center of the dusty main street and out of Redemption Gulch, leaving the town and its petty cruelties behind them. They left with nothing but the worn clothes on their backs and the unshakable foundation of a bond forged in patience and mutual understanding. Years later, stories would still be told about the drifter and the sheriff's maid. Far from that place, Jedediah and Leanne built a life on a small plot of land with a creek running through it. They built a small, sturdy house with their own hands. One day, a wagon came up their road, and a man from Redemption Gulch, tired of Brody's tyranny, brought them obsidian. Jedediah had sent the man money, every cent he had saved, to buy the horse's freedom. The stallion lived out his days in their wide green pasture, his spirit unbroken, a daily reminder of the true meaning of strength. Their life was not grand, but it was rich with a quiet joy and a deep, abiding peace that no wager could ever purchase. And as you watch their story fade, perhaps you see a reflection of your own struggles. We all face our own untamable stallions, the challenges that seem impossible, the societal pressures that tell us what to value. We are all tempted by superficial prizes, by the hollow victories that the world tells us will make us whole. But true worth, like the quiet wisdom of a forgotten soul, is often found where we least expect it. It's found not in breaking others to our will, but in offering a hand of patience and respect. It is found in the moral choice, in walking away from the noise of the crowd to embrace a quieter, more profound truth. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and perhaps tell us in the comments about a time you chose a truer prize. Subscribe for more tales that remind us of the strength within.